Kate Mila Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And welcome back, everybody who now you know what you're in for. This is the final video that I'm going to make on Philip K. Dick, so everybody take a deep breath of relief. I just didn't want to rush through and try to cram stuff into big, long video. And I thought I'd provide this particular topic with its own moment in history. Before I get started, I want to thank a channel called the I pronounced that wrong. It's not EPIC, it's Epoch, EPOC, philosopher. And it's a really interesting channel. He talks about all sorts of interesting concepts in philosophy and, better still, applies them to current events. So I love that. And I really liked his presentation on Philip K. Dick as an existentialist. And I thought, okay, let's dig into this. And I hope that you'll find this interesting. Existentialism is really not what I supposed it to be when I was in high school and understood nothing. Now I understand partially. So let's just progress. But once again, I want to thank the Epoch philosopher, and I would recommend you go to his channel and subscribe and give him a thumbs up and tell him I sent you. Okay, Philip K. Dick, existentialist. So let's define existentialism. In the 19th and the 20th century, it was a philosophical movement that says existence precedes essence. So we aren't created for a purpose, we define ourselves. And this sort of talks about what Philip was talking about in our previous video. We define ourselves, we determine who we are. Maybe you could call that free will. This emphasizes individual freedom and responsibility and subjectivity. And I could see why that would apply to a libertarian, but it does include more of a sense of community responsibility. So we'll get into it. Humans are born without a predetermined purpose, they believe, and they define themselves through their subjective choices in an absurd and meaningless world. So this is what they believe. I'm not espousing anything in particular. Sartre was basically an existentialist. He said, we are condemned to be free. We determine our own character and values. Well, I think there's truth to that. We bear absolute responsibility for our actions and choices. They believe life is absurd, existentialists, that it doesn't have inherent meaning. It's absurd to search for purpose because the universe is indifferent. I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm just putting that out there because that's part of the definition. We have to accept the burden of responsibility of being here. We have to create our own meaning. So then they listed a bunch of different existentialists and people who contributed to the whole philosophy of existentialism. So I'm going to tell you their names and the one basic thing they contributed. So Sartre was all about radical freedom. Camus was about the absurdity of life. Kierkegaard talked about subjectivity. Nietzsche, I wasn't really clear about him. I always thought he was a bit of a Nazi, not because of just the spelling of his name. And of course, he was earlier, but just that sort of Prussian, thing. Simone de Beauvoir, nobody's going to like it if I say it, but she was kind of a cheerleader for these existentialists. Heidegger, isn't he the one with the cat? And then Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is the one with all the issues. I wrote Crime and Punishment. If any of you saw the episode of Psychics and Psychics where we covered Dr. Vandervaart's theory of Brian Kohberger, the Idaho killer, being an example of Dostoevsky's character Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, the essence of the psychopathy, narcissism. So this is just one worldview, existentialism. Others would say, oh, well, without universal objective moral truths, even immoral acts can be legitimized. These are arguments kind of counter to it. So this worldview is isolating at the expense of social and communal responsibility. Existentialists emphasize the power of the individual to create their own purpose and reality. They don't reject ethical choices. They discuss the struggle and responsibility to make those choices, despite how absurd and incomprehensible existence is. So it's hard, to be ethical. It isn't lost on me that most influential existentialists seem to emerge from traumatic social environments. So I don't know if this means anything. I just felt like I saw a pattern here. World War II, Camus, Heidegger, Beauvoir, Sartre. Or they came from very strong religious or philosophical influences, like almost dictatorial, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche. Or from really strong religion and politics tied up together, like Dostoevsky. So there was some sort of external guiding authority for all of these people that in some way informed their worldview to create this sense of absurdity. So Philip Dick, his novels explore these ideas in the larger context of time, of our subjective experience, as opposed to the objectivity of science. And he explores our ability to tell the difference. Some of his work can be seen as a commentary on the capitalization and monetization of God through organized religion. He really didn't like this. Mega churches, the Vatican, he called it the commodification of God. I believe he had a point. He sets most of his work within corporations, not a happy camper when it comes to capitalism and corporations. Today, they say time is money. And this is, by comparison, Nietzsche said God is dead. The death of God and metaphysics, that coincides with increased poverty and mass consumption that began to get really bad at the time of Nietzsche. Philip Dick believed that our reality is a mass illusion, and I wrote, how Buddhist. It really is. So he wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It was a short story or a novella, from which they made the movie Blade Runner, which depicts a post-nuclear society organized through competing corporations. The protagonist is desperately seeking a real living being and not a robot, but that's not his job. They use empathy tests, which that's interesting. The work asks, what does it mean to be human? What constitutes a truly fully formed human? Philip Dick's work overall seems to say that we only exist as we relate to others, that we cannot separate ourselves. That sounds familiar. He explores and finds wanting the role of technology. He finds that it's a growing trap, a control system. I was really struck by a few images in Blade Runner that really didn't mean anything to me the first time I saw it. The first was the ubiquity of advertising and it loomed over everybody. It was everywhere. These big lit up signs, neon signs for corporations, and it's the corporate presence that was also suffocating. And I wasn't entirely clear on what was going on in this society, but it felt very subsistence, and there seemed to be so much brutality. Uh, in his work, Technology has its own ethic, and it influences our thinking. He was very concerned with people being brainwashed by the media, brainwashed by surveillance, brainwashed by corporations and advertising, and controlled by that and by surveillance. Everything and everyone is a resource to be utilized. So we see this in the worldview of the technocrats of Silicon Valley. Some of this is my stuff, and some of this I took from that epoch philosopher. But I saw Silicon Valley writ large in the message of Blade Runner. So Silicon Valley, what are these technocrats? What are they really after? So they all follow this guy called Curtis Yarvin, who likes to call himself a philosopher, but I think he's kind of half-baked. He says ordinary people lack the capacity to engage in democracy. So, right away for me is one of his basic premises is flawed. He said we'd be better off being run by a CEO who was like a monarch. So run government like a corporation with a monarch as the CEO at the head. These technocrats believe progressive values have been foisted upon ordinary people, and really all people really prioritize is security. I disagree with that. Sure, we're all biologically impelled to survival, to protect our own survival. But that's not the only thing that dominates our lives, and we're completely capable of engaging in democracy and in our own can't think of the right word, but agency over our own society. It is arrogant, supercilious, arrogant, narcissistic to think that a small handful of self-proclaimed elitists know better for everybody. That's BS. They're just in their position from sheer luck of birth, luck of the environment that they grew up in, luck in the bank that their parents had, the color of their skin. A lot of variables go into where they are, and they take full credit for it. It's runaway ego. And they believe that a society is best that's a network of monarchical corporations in which people have no voice. This is what they want for us. When I say that we have those technocrats on one side, and parallel to them, racing to the finish line, the right-wing, white Christian nationalist, religious nut jobs, allegedly. And when they get to the finish line, they're going to go after each other like wolverines. They all despise democracy because they want the power in their own hands. What it boils down to. Technocrats want it for different reasons than the theocrats. But it ultimately ends up with everybody else being at the bottom and getting walked on. Curtis Yarvin is one of these guys who's, I think he's in his 30s or his 40s, and he's still classifying everything as Tolkien creatures. He classifies people into these Tolkien-esque categories. The elite are the elves, and at the very bottom are the orcs or the dwarves. This is just working class people. Only good for labor, not good for anything else in the world. So this is reflected in our current emphasis on education, in the kind of emphasis we put on education. We don't consider anymore education for the sake of just becoming knowledgeable about everything or anything. We only regard education as a tool to be useful to make money. And far be it from me. I mean, I was in science in college, so no shade on science, but the STEM classes are emphasized and the humanities and the arts are ignored or minimized or completely gotten rid of. And now we value classes that can lead to jobs, and education can be monetized. It could be monetized at the front end when you pay a fortune, and they tell you that you can monetize it yourself later when you have that diploma, the degree, and will get a job. They're misrepresenting. And we're ultimately taught to value making money rather than to value being educated. In Philip K. Dick's work, the characters live in that sort of a world. They're trapped by corporations. They can't see beyond the technology. They're blinded by the advertising. They're oppressed by the corporations. I mean, he predicted where we are. It's very interesting. And it reflects Hannah Arendt's comment on the banality of evil. Evil doesn't come in jackboots with a saber or something. Evil comes ordinary. Fascist technocracy is always with us, or at least has always been bubbling under the surface. Didn't go anywhere. The Man in the High Castle, his book about that, explores this whole idea. One of the main characters is ironically called John Smith, and he represents the good German of Hitler's regime, the seemingly average, normal guy who helps to perpetuate atrocities. Not necessarily from fanaticism, can be, but not always, but from a failure to recognize true evil, perhaps from fear of it, or an apathy about it, or most likely the inability to think critically. So limit education to things that can be monetized. Remove from education teaching how to think critically. It's a setup. Applied to our current situation, we see a leader who is wholly amoral and self-serving, but he's supported by a sycophantic and ideologically fascist administration. Some of them are both. Some of them are simply opportunists who see the opportunity and kiss the you-know-what. Others are fanatics and will do anything to perpetuate what he's going for. Take Musk, for example. Now, he's a technocrat. He's one of those Curtis Yarvin followers. He's a devotee of Yarvin and the Dark Enlightenment, which is the system I explained to you of the corporate monarch. Wholly unempathetic, elitist, eugenicist, racist, misogynist, opportunist. Another would be Stephen Miller, who is an unspeakable misanthropic fascist. So what we see today is the United States moving into a fascist program of centralization of power, dissolution of law, and democratic procedure, and with all of it through a far-right nationalist lens. It's a slow dissolution of institutions, normalization of brutality, and the elevation of an elitist class. It's a slow devolution into the authoritarian abyss. Most of us miss it. Most of us don't see this. This is something I struggle with constantly, with those near and dear to me who are intelligent and informed, who listen to me rant and rave all the time, who've read the things they know. But I wouldn't call them apathetic. I would say that there's just enormous denial at play. But most of us miss it because of apathy or disinterest or just the increasingly existential demands of life. And I think that these demands are becoming increasingly more desperate intentionally. The more difficult it becomes to feed your family, to find a job, to get medical care, to keep a house, a roof over your head, to keep heat on. The more difficult those things become, less energy and emotional freedom and psychological time you have to devote to these ideas. So Philip Dick's work mirrors all this in the larger context of the philosophical question, how do we strive for more? How do we ethically apply technology? How should we deal with corporate greed? So his work is a meaning. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. His work is a warning not to take a libertarian view. That can be toxic individualism because man is condemned to be free. He emphasizes that freedom requires decency and we are responsible by virtue of our choices. He summarized it in his 77 speech. Remember, I mentioned I found him to be very ethical, in which he envisioned a world that ultimately was a garden of peace and beauty. He believed that it would inevitably rise over time, linear or lateral, as variables are replaced by better choices. He very much echoes the Gnostic teachings that we're living in an illusory physical state, that in order to gain experience is why we're here, and we will return to the perfect source of love and gnosis or wisdom. So I realize he's not generally regarded as a Gnostic, but I can't ignore that his ideas parallel a lot of their thought, and perhaps in an alternative parallel universe. So that's the end of my little expose. Philip K. Dick. I hope you guys understood. I hope I understand. I hope you were okay with it. I don't know how to say it without sounding, I hope you appreciate it. That's not what I meant. I hope it resonated for everybody. I kind of hope I'm not the only one who thinks I see parallels here. I hope that there was some clarity in everything that he said that makes sense to me. Let me know what you think, because I could use some clarifying too. So thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming back. As you well know, there'll always be more. I'm going to do a thing with Deborah Lupien and hopefully talk to Philip K. Dick. So keep your eye open for that. She's been gone. We have it recorded. We're getting around to it. And I've got a whole long list for her. So we'll be busy. In the meantime, thank you for watching. And Slungafoil. Slunch.